On this week's show, we're going to talk about Russell's heroic one stop that all came to nothing and Sainz finally signing a deal. Let's go. Hello and welcome to another episode of Back of the Grid. I'm your host this week, Tom, and I am joined by Chris.
Evening.
Evening. A very interesting race that played out so well, was so entertaining, and as I said in the intro, it all felt like it was kind of for nothing in the end, at least if you're a Mercedes or a George Russell specific fan.
Yeah. It was a really interesting... I know, like, strategic races aren't everyone's cup of tea, and there certainly wasn't a enormous amount of wheel-to-wheel racing, but strategically it was a fascinating race watching it all coming together at the end. And
how did you find it out of interest? At what point did you find it becoming an interesting race?
Definitely, like, the back third of the race, I guess. Like,
were you at any point during the earlier stages worried that this might be a bit of a boring race?
It was looking very DRS trainy early on, wasn't it?
The only reason I ask this is because I spent the first 20 laps or so thinking, oh no, is this going to be worth my time? And are these 8 cars basically going to stay within 10 seconds of each other the entire race? Maybe 1 or 2 shifts from like an undercut or something like that, but predominantly these 8 cars will finish in roughly this order. And then a little bit of strategy came into play and spiced it up a little bit, I guess. But I think I find it a little bit of a shame because the one thing that turned it into a pretty interesting race, like I said in the lead-in, was all for nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
George getting disqualified. I mean, should we talk about the facts of the matter? Do you want to run through the Russell situation? Because I'm sure everybody knows about it, but I guess it's worth explaining the situation for if anyone's been living under a rock for the last 48 hours.
So obviously he won it on track by pulling off a one-stop strategy, which kind of caught everyone off guard. No one even really... I didn't even see any talk pre-race that it was even a possibility, really. Like, no one really was seriously considering it. But yeah, he took a set of hard tyres, 34 laps. Looked like he was going to get caught by Hamilton and maybe even Piastri towards the end. But, I mean, his driving in those closing laps was unbelievable. Like, the traction he was able to get out of the important corners on tyres that old was so impressive.
Yeah. It was a really well-managed race for the most part, wasn't it? So the actual disqualification comes from being, I believe the exact figure is 1.5 kilograms underweight, right?
1.5 kilos under the weight limit, which Mercedes have just accepted. They're not protesting it. They said it was an error on their part. It's not... They've not sort of done their investigation yet to determine exactly what went wrong. I know there's been a lot of talk around the fuel levels because the way the FIA statement talked about this made it look like there was some weirdness going on with the fuel, or possibly even that Mercedes were trying to trick the stewards by leaving a bit more fuel in the car for the weighing than they were supposed to. I have read about this, and basically the way it works is at the end of the race, the cars are weighed in the state they finished the race. So there will still be an amount of fuel in, because obviously they have to have, I think, is it a litre of fuel I think they're supposed to have for fuel sampling?
For sampling, I think it is.
Yeah, because Vettel lost the podium a few years back, didn't he? For
like
exactly
900 mil or something.
Yeah, but so basically they weigh the car, even though the weight limit they have to hit is the dry weight with no fuel in. They'll weigh the cars as they are with the fuel in, but if any cars look very close to the limit, then they'll tell the teams to get all the fuel out and reweigh it. And when they weighed Russell's car still with fuel in, it was at the weight limit. So obviously they already knew straight away that it was going to be underneath. Mercedes have said they suspect the one-stop strategy is at the very least a contributing factor. The thinking being that they took a set of tyres much further than they really ever planned to, and as a result, they had more wear than they planned for. So 1.5 kilograms works out to 333 grams per wheel? Is that math? That math's right, is it?
No, it'd be 350.
Yeah.
No,
7.
No.
Between 300 and 400 grams.
375 grams.
I'm sure the Discord don't tell us exactly.
This is not a maths podcast. 375 grams.
Yes. So it works out to that per tyre, which isn't an outlandish thing to, say might have happened. However, we've seen lots and lots and lots of people over the years do longer stints than planned. We had people, other cars in this race did longer stints than planned. They didn't have the same problem. So as much as that contributed, probably, it's not right to say going long caused the problem.
No, I think it's almost a perfect storm to some degree, because they'll have probably been running the car close to the weight limit anyway to get as much as they could out of it. There will be an element of there's excess weight lost from running the tyres longer than expected. That is logical. There's also the factor of the fact that you don't get a cool-down lap at Spa because you literally go to La Source and then turn around and come into the pits backwards. So for years, for decades, you've seen drivers picking up marbles onto tyres, and anyone that's watched the sport for any considerable length of time knows the reason they do that is to try and pick up as much extra weight as they can for these exact reasons. So I think there's an element of a perfect storm about this where, yes, there will be more weight loss because the tyres have been run much longer than they were expected to. They'll have been running the car quite close to the limit, I imagine, anyway, because of the fact that they're still playing catch-up to the likes of McLaren and Red Bull. They're not quite on their pace yet, so they're going to try and push anything as close to the limit as they possibly can. And then anything that might have been able to be recovered by going and getting some hefty pickup on a cool-down lap is immediately lost. Now, I'm not educated enough to know exactly how much weight you can add to a car with a cool-down lap, but I must say I have picked up a rubber marble from a circuit when we've been on circuits after a Formula 1 race before, and there's a fair amount of weight to them. So
I've seen someone say 2 to 3 kilos of pickup is not out of the question.
And obviously that solves this problem.
Although again,
again, it's not the sole contributor, I think, but it's just a perfect storm of different factors.
I do wonder if a car had gone around and picked up a load of rubber and was right on the limit, whether the FIA would be allowed to say, put a fresh set of tyres on this and we're weighing it again. Because I know with inters and wets, they can ask, because inters and wets way different to slick tyres, and they can force people to swap to a set of slicks for weighing purposes. That's
fair, but then you could argue the same the other way around and say, well, put a fresh set of slicks on and we'll come in on the weight.
Well, yeah, that's true.
So if you're saying we think that this is marginal because you've got the pickup, put a fresh set on. If it's the other way, you'd surely be able to argue and say, well, we're only just under because of all this excessive tyre wear. We started the race with tyres on at the limit. So if you put an absolutely fresh pair of, or even a less used set, we'll pass. Like,
the thing is...
It's a swings and roundabouts thing, that, in my opinion.
The thing is, though, it's the team's job to be compliant with the rules
100%.
At all times, not just at the start of the race. So... there is that. Lewis Hamilton finished a race on 3 wheels a few years ago. I'm pretty sure that would have had some implications for the weight of the car. But again, they can just put on the like for like part to replace the tyres to make it back up to the state it should be in. The other thing is, so it seems more likely that this was just Mercedes miscalculated.
I think that's
weight needed to be in the car.
Yeah, I think there's a ballast miscommunication, or like I said before, pushing it very close to any kind of limit that was there, and in order to try and maximise what they could get out of the car. And I mean, I'm not saying that they don't expect to be weighed, because I think am I right in saying every car's weighed no matter what?
I believe they're all weighed, yeah. Or every car in the points is weighed. Yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously if someone fails, they then weigh the car that comes up, I think. Yeah. So it's not like they didn't expect that they'd maybe finish middle of the points and not be as at risk for the scrutiny, because that's that's not how it would work. So I think it was more that there's a couple of elements to it. They pushed it to. I mean, it's only the same as in years gone by when teams would push the fuel loads. And I mean, the Vettel situation you brought up was a classic example of just pushing it that little bit too far, like pushing it on maximum attack for too long, burning up just that little bit too much fuel and not having the regulated amount left for a sample. It's not the same thing, but it's a very similar sort of scenario of just pushing something a little bit too far and coming in very marginal. But I also respect the fact that as difficult as it is to see a race win taken away from someone after the fact, and yes, it's one of those things where decisions change the result, a significant part of the result as well, not just somewhere in the points people have moved up. Like, this is literally the race win that's changed hands over a disqualification. But I mean, you can only weigh the cars when you can weigh the cars, right? And like, there's only they're not going to hold up the whole situation until they've weighed the top three cars. I don't think it's just not how they do it. But I think that at least we've not had some weird loophole allowed that's meant that Russell's kept the win, because for me this is very unfortunate, but it's one of those things where the rule is the rule, and whether you're 10 grams or 10 kilos underweight, if you come in underweight under the situations that it's pre-agreed you will be weighed in, then unfortunately, I'd say exactly the same as the fuel measurements. If whether you're 10 millilitres under the fuel amount or a full litre, whatever it doesn't matter what the margin is. And it does frustrate me a little bit in the sense that we can be this cut and dry with certain things, and it feel a bit crappy because Russell's lost the win post everything else, but it be deemed like fair because the car's underweight, but then be so blasé and nonchalant about, well, I mean, this rule, we only apply it in this circumstance, because, and just be vague about things in other areas. And I know not everything's quite as cut and dry as, here is a figure, we are over it or under it, and if you're the wrong side, you're out. I know not everything's that black and white, cut and dry, but there's definitely other areas of the sport where we can be this direct about, you have broken a rule, therefore this is happening.
Yeah. It is frustrating. But yeah, I totally agree. Rules are rules. It's a very simple thing to weigh how much a car and driver combined is, and they failed there.
It doesn't even matter about the driver in this weight. It's not a driver and car combined weight in this scenario. As far as I'm aware, I feel free for people to correct me if I am wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is a car only weight at this point, because it's to do with the fact that, do you remember when we had this scenario where drivers like Jenson Button, who were 6 foot plus, were looking gaunt and unwell because it was a combined weight? Somewhere after that, some of the rules were changed to say there is a combined weight. There is a combined weight as well, but some of these regulations adjust the car alone to make it fairer for the taller or heavier drivers of different builds, because it wouldn't be really fair. To me, it's not really fair when you've got, say, Jenson Button and Yuki Tsunoda for argument's sake. And I know they've never raced in the same,
but yeah,
at the same time as each other. But
well,
like
George Russell's a prime example.
George Russell. Like George Russell's a lean guy, and he probably is lean to help keep his weight down. But it is one of those things, isn't it, where if you did it as an overall weight, including the driver, Yuki Tsunoda's probably got like a 20 kilo advantage over someone like George Russell. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, he must be nothing in comparison. So, yeah, the weight, as far as I'm aware, for this particular rule is just the car. And it's another reason why it's considered a dry weight as well for the fuel, because of it's not about what fuel you've got left at the end as well. It's about just the car without. And like you say, there is that scenario where they'll weigh it with whatever fuel's in it and gauge by how much is left in and say, well, hang on a minute, if we take that fuel out, mathematically speaking, you're probably going to come under. Please drain it, and we're going to drain it, and we will reweigh it. Is I guess the same as, well, this is only making the weight because your driver's got 10 kilos heavier than every other driver. So take driver out. Let's see what happens.
I think another interesting fact with all this, if you go back and watch the end of the race, they cut to Toto in the garage and he does not look happy. Like, and this is what makes me think it's not just a case of them necessarily pushing the limits and knowing they'd done it. That to me says they realised mid-race that they were in trouble and there was nothing they could do about it.
Maybe, but I also think
read on it.
He was pretty much like that the entire race, like on the weekend, and I don't know. He seemed okay doing his little FaceTime that he was doing whilst the podium ceremonies were going on and stuff like that. Like, I think maybe people are reading a little bit too much into that being specifically about the Russell scenario. If anything, I think that sour-faced Toto, as we'll call it when it becomes an emoji in the Discord, is maybe more to do with... Obviously, I've not heard all the radio yet, so this is absolutely pure speculation, but it makes me wonder if Hamilton has said something on cooldown or towards the end of the race that's like a bit of a you've screwed me here, guys, kind of. I'm not saying, for full context, not saying he has said that because I've not had opportunity to go back and listen to every piece of radio, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's a multitude of things that it's just like that's the reason for Sourface Toto in that imagery.
Could be.
So,
I suppose the other question that it's pretty impossible to know the answer to is whether that 1.5 kilos less he was carrying actually made a difference. And I know people work out every kilogram is worth this much in lap time, but it's not like you can just extrapolate that out over the amount of laps. Like, it's far more complicated than that. Yeah, there's a lot. There would be a lot of complicated maths that went into that, and we couldn't even manage to divide 1.5 kilograms by 4. So it's not an equation for us to be doing. But I mean, given...
Well, I was just going to say the old equation that usually comes up is, from what I remember, somewhere between 5 and 10 kilos is about a tenth per lap. Yeah. But that will vary based on the circuit, which is why it's quite broad. This is obviously a long lap, so I would say it's going to be nearer that 5 kilos as a tenth. And if that is the case, if that does check out, then you're going to be looking at 300ths-ish. Because you've got to take that tenth for 5 kilos and then divide it down by 3. So it's a very, very small amount per lap. And then you've also got to factor in the aspect of being on those older tyres and being slower anyway. I think that having to drive that bit slower to manage older tyres probably negates any advantage that the 1.5 kilo weight saving at the end of the race would have given him. And if it is anything to do with the tyre being far more worn than anyone else's, for example, then there's a point where he's not got that advantage, and he's only got that advantage on very, very worn tyres, which again, like I say, are going to make him slower anyway. So it becomes a balancing act where you've got to be slower on the tyre to be careful on it, even if by the end of it you've got a 300th of a second up on someone because you're 1.5 kilos lighter than them. I think it's marginal at best going down that route.
It is.
It gave him an advantage.
If you're running slightly less weight, then it is, however minuscule, going to have an effect on how fast you wear through the tyres. And there was a lot of fuel saving going on because of the lack of a safety car. You're going to be using a tiny bit less fuel. And we're talking about a race where first and second was split by half a second at the line. So it's tight. It's hard to know, but it's tight.
Herein lies the vague side of the rules that makes it all murky, because ultimately what you're saying there is actually a good point. There was no safety car this weekend because it was a relatively there was Joe early in the race that might have been a problem, but he managed to get the car back and properly retire it. There's, something like 80% of Belgian Grand Prix have a safety car.
Yeah.
Teams will have been banking on a safety car at some point.
100%.
Definitely will have. 80% technically. 80% banking on a safety car. But so I think with that, this is where it becomes interesting, because yes, the fuel weight at the end of the race doesn't matter against the dry weight of the car that the regulation is set to. However, if you've got more fuel in the car because we've had a safety car period, that you're not on the limit of the weight limit with the fuel in, you don't come under the tighter scrutiny where they drain it and weigh it dry and then officially come under. Or, in this case, I mean, it could have easily been coming under without the fuel being drained, possibly. So it was a slam dunk even before they've drained the fuel. I don't know the specifics, but even though the fuel weight isn't technically a factor in the weight limit, what you're saying about the safety car, I think, is a legitimate point, because if there's 10 litres of fuel in that car, if I remember right, a litre of fuel is about a litre of fuel is about a kilo, so let's call it 10 kilos.
Roughly.
They're going to look at that and go, that's about right. Which it comes back to the whole vague, why aren't we draining all the cars and weighing them all dry full stop anyway?
I mean, Sarah in the chat makes a good point, which is that the teams save literal grams by choosing which bits of the car they do and don't paint. They're not going to do that if it did make a difference. So a kilo and a half over race distance is going to make a difference.
I think, like I say, I'm not saying that it wouldn't have made any difference. I think in this one scenario, when it's factored in with running a much longer stint and having to look after tyres, that's where it sort of balances itself out to some degree. Not saying it's irrelevant, just more that it's there's a tyre saving mentality going on, which automatically makes you slower by proxy.
Right. Should we speed through some other people?
Yeah, we've talked about the one person who officially didn't finish the race, technically speaking. Let's talk about the other 18 that did.
So obviously Lewis Hamilton inherited the win, his 105th win in F1, after he took the lead from Leclerc in the sort of early stages, and then just looked quite comfortable really in the lead for much of the race. Obviously Piastri was gaining on him at the end, but he had enough to hold him off. He seemed really unhappy at the end of the race, I think chiefly because he had kind of been outdone by his teammates who'd been put into a different strategy, and I think Hamilton maybe felt he should have been informed of what was going on better than the team did. But
hence me saying that I think that Toto's face in that imagery is more big picture overall than just...
Yeah, could well be.
Ironically, after us saying last week we've never seen a team make such hard work of a 1-2, on follow-up from that, I've never seen a team principal look so unhappy with a 1-2.
Piastri rounded out the podium, only 6th on the grid, but really good drive from him.
Decent.
Really maximised that. He went long on the middle stint, so he had fresher tyres for the closing stages. Sorry, I've got that wrong, haven't I?
Well, yes and no. On track.
On the physical podium, it was Piastri that rounded it out.
Yeah. The points winning podium, though.
Yeah, short of final stint. got him sort of in contention for a win, but he needed a few more laps in the end. 3 podiums in 4 races for Piastri. He's on a really good. He seems to have taken a step forward in the sort of lead up to this summer break. He's on a really good run of form at the moment. Leclerc also inherited a podium spot. Who, I mean, we've got to go back to qualifying. Leclerc's qualifying lap to get on the front row was extremely impressive. Became pole after Verstappen's penalty. And amazingly, he actually held the lead at the start as well. Like, everyone was saying, being on pole at Spa is not where you want to be, because in the last, like, however many races, the pole man hasn't led at the end of the first lap. But, Leclerc held it for a while. And, I thought it was a really good drive from Leclerc to sort of get the most out of what was probably the third, maybe even fourth fastest car, arguably. To get a podium from that. Yeah, pretty impressive.
The McLarens didn't have a great qualifying, but were probably faster than the Ferraris on race pace, I would say.
Yeah, I mean,
at least Piastri was. Maybe not so much Norris. Norris had a bit of a. I mean, we'll get to him in a minute, but yeah, I think that the Ferraris had better race pace than I thought they would.
Definitely, I thought Leclerc
happy to say that now.
Plummet.
Yeah. I thought the wet conditions and just having okay quali pace most of the time was flattering the place he started. Just it was a flattering result on the quali grid. But I think, I think the race pace looked a lot better. I'm trying to think how they've gone on in recent years at Spa. Though. I'm trying to think if this is just this is maybe one of those kind of. It's like it's high speed, isn't it? And generally fairly low downforce for most people. Like, people don't always go that high downforce here unless the weather's being atrocious. Like, that was part of Max's problem, for example, wasn't it?
They went backwards and forwards
in the wet
times.
They were looking good during quali, and he was so on it because of the extra downforce, but it also meant that he basically couldn't overtake anyone in the race like he has done in years gone by. And I think that's maybe why this suits Ferrari, because if there's anything you can say about Ferrari is they will build a car that they can win at Monza with, basically. And I'm not saying this circuit's anywhere remotely like Monza, but there's an element of long straights and low downforce that is not the same setup by any stretch of the imagination, but it's probably closer than, say, somewhere like Silverstone. Isn't it? Then again, they sometimes go quite all right at Silverstone, so I'm probably just talking out my rear end at this point.
Verstappen, again, we have to go back to qualifying. That lap in qualifying was unreal. Like, the gap from him to Leclerc in second was the same as the gap from Leclerc back to 7th or 8th place, I think it was in the end.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's like 6/10. It was such a good lap. Obviously, penalty dropped into 11th on the grid. And then, the race pace just wasn't really there like you'd maybe expect. Like, not that long ago, you'd expect Verstappen to be in the lead from 11th on the grid within like 15 or 20 laps. But, just wasn't quite there. Overtaking was difficult in general. I think the way the Red Bull set up maybe didn't help that. But, he ended up... I mean, he was 5th on the road, 4th in the results in the end. I think we can definitely say now after this recent run of races that Red Bull categorically don't have the fastest car anymore. At least not race to race. I
mean, 11th to 4th isn't actually that bad, even if the 4th is from a disqualification higher up. And I think, were it not Verstappen in a Red Bull, you'd actually be looking at someone going 11th to 4th and going, that was a good recovery drive considering the penalties. And I think there's this standard that's set quite high for Verstappen of, well, basically when it comes to Spa, he always takes new engine components or gearboxes. He always starts like 10th or further back and he still wins anyway. He's mega at Spa. That's what he's going to do. And it's maybe the fact that he's set this precedent for the last 3 years or whatever it's been, taking a penalty of some kind and still winning the race. and everyone's now sort of dejected, saying, "Well, he didn't do that good." But in reality, he actually went from 11th to 4th or 11th to 5th, depending on how you look at it, which isn't that bad of a drive in the grand scheme of things. And I think, like I say, other drivers in other cars, you'd maybe looking at that going, it's quite a good performance, like potential driver of the day candidate, depending on who it is. So it's a weird scenario to be in where you expect that much of him that gaining 6 places is actually considered underperforming.
But I think
weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but it definitely says more about the car than him. Like, I think he did what he could with what was underneath him, but yeah, the car just, everyone else has really caught up that gap now.
Yeah, and it's helped. My point, I guess, is further helped by what Paul's saying in the Discord chat of, especially when your teammate goes from 2nd to 8th.
Yeah.
Like, you know, he's gone as far backwards as Verstappen went forwards. So
yeah, basically.
That says it all.
Who's next? Norris. Pretty middling race from him. He made a mistake on the exit of turn 1. He dipped a couple of wheels in the gravel, which dropped him a few places. And then, again, didn't really make a ton of progress. Like, in clean air, he had more pace than the Red Bulls, but he was able to pass Perez, but then he just kind of got stuck behind Max and never really looked much like passing him.
They did the wrong thing with the strategy, I think, in the grand scheme of things. Like, there was potential in that, I think, when they started trying to go long on the mediums and eke it out as far as possible. I thought they were basically going to try and do something similar to what Russell was doing and get themselves back into it by really eking out the mediums to make the one-stopper work. And then they brought him in probably earlier than you'd have expected to. But, I mean, maybe that was a case of they were trying to do that and he got to a point where he's like, this, you know, I'm going to lose more time on this tyre. It needs to be changed. And they went back to the hard, didn't they? But, yeah, I think maybe that's because they were starting to clutch at straws because of the mistake in turn 1 that had put him on the back foot in the first place. And they got into a bit of a vicious cycle of, well, the only way to do this is to out-strategize the other teams around us because we're stuck in a DRS train and we can't like legitimately race as we'd want to. I don't know, but it just felt like the strategy definitely didn't help that scenario for Norris, even if he was put in that position by his own mistakes for all intents and purpose.
Yeah. Who's next? Sainz. Sainz is a weird one. So Sainz was the only one, only driver other than Zhou at the back to start on the hard tyres, which he took for 20 laps, which meant he led for a chunk. He then boxed for mediums, but only kept them on for 8 laps and then went back to hards again. Bit of a weird one. He ended up finishing 1 place up from where he started, and that was only because of Russell's disqualification. Yeah, bit of a non-afternoon for Sainz, really.
Another bit of weird strategy, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. Which brings us to Perez, who had a really good Saturday. Stuck it 3rd, which became a front row start after Verstappen's penalty. Yeah, looking really good. In the race, he lost a place to Hamilton at the very start and then just kind of like faded backwards. Ended up finishing 8th, which put him last of the fastest 4 teams, basically, from a front row. I can't remember if it was Christian Horner or Helmut Marko said like their predictions had them getting 3rd and 5th in that race, and they were like, we got the 5th, we didn't get the 3rd, we got an 8th instead, which is pretty damning. Like, he took an extra pit stop at the end for fastest lap, which he got, but even before the stop he was about 15 seconds behind Verstappen, having started several positions ahead of him, and like strategically doing more or less the same. Perez did medium hard, whereas Verstappen did medium hard medium. But even so.
But the stint lengths are around about the same, aren't they? Even if in different order. I mean, yes, there's going to be some advantage to using different tyres at different points in the race, but
yeah,
the stint lengths are about the same, so it's not that dissimilar a strategy.
Verstappen
in the grand scheme
spent
of
26 laps on mediums. Perez was 21 laps on mediums.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that Perez's race was pretty much 50-50 mediums and hards, except for the couple of laps he did at the end on the softs. Yeah, obviously there's still speculation. We'll get to Perez again when we get into the inbox, I think. Then a couple more to wrap up. Aston Martin, 3 races in a row now. They've got into the points. I think they've sort of re-established themselves as like the next best team after the top ones now. That's sort of languished for a while, but they've had like a few races in a row now where they've been picking up those like 8th, 9th, 10th places.
Yeah.
RB had another weird strategy for Ricciardo, actually. He was the only driver to start on softs. He did a soft, medium, hard strategy. He was the only one to do that, but actually made it work and finished in the points. He scored in 3 of the last 6 races now since Canada, and he's outscored Tsunoda 7 points to 3. I thought Ricciardo was pretty damn good this weekend, actually. Like, the car's not there at all, but a couple of races now, Ricciardo's been doing a pretty decent job, even if the team have been giving him bizarre strategies to kind of try and work with.
Yeah.
Alpine, Ocon, impressive in qualifying. He got into Q3, managed to hold on for 9th place, which ends a run of a couple of pointless races for the team. Williams, meanwhile, have now gone 2 races in a row with no points for the first time for a while. Williams sort of falling behind on upgrades now, aren't they? Like, don't seem to be bringing much to the table.
Yeah, but disappointing for me, the race pace side of things, because it was actually looking quite promising for a time with Albon, especially like in qualifying and stuff like that. Like, you know, there was an element of potential there, I guess, because, I mean, I know, fair enough, he didn't actually make it through to Q3 in the end, did he? He was just
close
outside in Q2, like 11th. But, or was that? Yeah, that was 11th before Verstappen. So that's why I'm thinking he might have got through to Q3, and he technically didn't, did he? He qualified 11th and was bumped up to 10th by Verstappen dropping down the order. So that's why in my head I was thinking, Albon was in the top 10 qualifying, but technically he wasn't. But even still, like, that's a good place for that Williams to be qualifying, to then go on and do something in the race and try and, you know, push for some overtakes and make some points. But yeah, I mean, didn't necessarily go backwards, but still finished lower than he started, didn't he? Just the race pace didn't seem quite right for them, I don't think.
No. Yeah, it's the same story for Bottas, actually. Like, Bottas was like flirting around the bottom end of the points early in the race, and then just fell off as the race went on, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Driver of the day. Do you have anyone in mind? Because I've not really given this a ton of thought, actually, leading up to this.
So, I mean, before the disqualification, you would have probably easily said it was Russell.
Yeah.
And I think, despite the disqualification, part of me still wants to give it to Russell, just on the basis that it's not necessarily his direct fault. That even if it comes from saying, I think I can make a one-stop work, at which point, if it is in any remote risk of being something that will cause them to have weight issues because of this tyre deg situation, the team need to be saying, you know, we can push a stint to try and overcut someone, whatever that might be, but we have to stick to a 2-stop to, you know, to stay legal, essentially. However they want to word it, I don't care, but, like, you know, if they were even remotely concerned that that might be a problem, they should have really said, we can't do that because we need to finish the race in a certain condition. But yeah, I mean, the drive itself was a great one. How much of that you can attribute to being 1.5 kilos underweight is another matter.
Yeah, I kind of want to go for the chaotic option and give it to him despite the disqualification.
Let's do it then, because that's where I was until he got disqualified.
Disqualification weight aside, I do think that was his best drive in F1. And
look at all the commentary around it until the disqualification came to light. Like, literally, so many people around F1 media saying very similar things of, this is one of your best drives, if not your best drive. Like, this is such a strong drive. Like, but is he tarnished by a car that doesn't meet the regulations?
The thing is, if that car... Well, we'll never know. We'll never know what he would have done in that car had it been legal.
Yeah.
I think... No, I want to do it. I'm going to choose chaos.
Let's be chaos. Let
people tell us we're insane, but
yeah, do it.
I'm giving it to George Russell.
Awesome.
George disqualified Russell gets driver of the day. What about move of the day?
I wrote a couple down. I'm going to see what I put. So there's Piastri against Leclerc into Lecom.
Around the outside,
Hulk also did a very similar thing to somebody else, but I forgot who it was.
Is that the one that they showed in a tiny postage stamp in the corner of the screen so you could barely see what was going on?
Possibly, but I think I did see a full screen replay watching it through F1 TV. Russell also had a really good move on Magnussen, but his car was too light, so he had an advantage.
You can't give Russell 2 awards.
I can't remember where that one was. I've completely blanked now where that one was. It was somewhere unconventional, which is why it stood out to me, Russell on Magnussen. Maybe it was they were going wheel to wheel through the bus stop?
I don't know. Actually.
It felt unconventional wherever it was. But the fact that I can't remember means maybe it wasn't as good as I thought it was at the time when I wrote it down. When I literally just wrote Russell on Magnussen.
If we want to keep this unconventional choices train going... we could give it to Kimi Antonelli. Did you see what he did in the F2? I think it was a sprint race.
I can't comment unless someone can give me a very quick link to it that I can watch literally right now whilst we're talking. I have not caught up on F2 yet. I was trying to watch it in the middle of the Peak District. Watch the highlights in the middle of the Peak District whilst having a pint after a walk. And we're struggling very much with signal due to being in the Peak District. So...
I'm sure I can. Oh, here we go. I already have it ready to show you.
Excellent podcast content.
I'll drop
Chris,
it in Discord for you so you can watch it there.
The sound of Chris sharing me a link, and now the moments of 32 seconds of silence whilst I watch said move.
For those who haven't seen it, what we're describing is Kimi Antonelli in the wet.
He's doing a Ricciardo in the wet.
Side by side through Eau Rouge.
Yeah.
Pretty unbelievable. Whether we're going to dish out awards for Formula 2 is a different question.
I'd say, look, if that had happened in the F1, that would be move of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's be unconventional. We've already given look. Driver of the day didn't compete in F1 by official standards. Move of the day didn't happen in F1 by official standards. Let's keep this train going.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do the last one then.
Honestly, what the are we doing here?
Any nominees?
I've seen some people suggesting Sainz's strategy. He was sort of doing what McLaren did in Hungary, just like pitting to cover off a ghost because there was no one to actually try and cover off, which was a very weird one. The other one that stood out to me was on the podium. I believe it was the Constructors' Trophy was handed out by Tom Christensen, and the caption for him just said Rolex ambassador. We just forgetting the fact that he's a 9-time Le Mans winner. No, he's just demoted to Rolex ambassador.
I'm sure you're well aware that other motorsports do not exist when you are in the presence of Formula One, Chris. Yeah. I can't think if not a proper WTF, but it made me like go, what? During the scenario of it all unfolding, which was the Alpines just randomly turning up red because of their ties to certain actors and movies.
I'll tell you what.
Like, okay.
Credit where it's due. I was waiting for Crofty to be mixing up Alpines, Ferraris, and Haas's the entire weekend, and I actually don't remember hearing him do that once. So credit where it's due. He got that bit right at least.
Because I did look at an Alpine every once in a while, and I was like, "What's the Haas?" Oh wait, no, it's not the Haas. I must admit I made that mistake watching it.
There was something else Crofty did keep banging on about. It's like a dog with a bone. Like,
of course.
Last race, it was the Verstappen sim racing thing where he just talked about constantly. And then this week there was something else he just kept on bringing up. It's bizarre.
I'm so glad I watch on F1 TV.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I quite like the Rolex Ambassador one. That felt particularly
let's go
egregious.
with it. Let's go with it.
Very sad.
Right. That was nominations and awards done. I'm going to rattle us through some predictions. Not a great week for me and you. I feel like I say that most weeks, to be honest. Single point for me, single point for you.
Yeah.
Our top scorers in listener world for everybody else were two people who scored 3 out of 5. Felipe Gergel, I hope I said that right, and Gareth Walker both scored 3 for slightly different combinations. One thing fairly consistent, though, at the higher scorers who were scoring 3s and 2s was actually getting Sainz and the number of finishes right. So it was actually the win and the pole, fastest in qualifying, that messed people up. I'll give it a little bit of clarity around the scoring on Preds before I move on for anyone who's like, what is going on here? So, fastest in Q3, we've said for years that the reason we word it like that is because it's whoever is top of Q3 before penalties. So that goes to Verstappen. So that's where your points have gone there. The winner is the actual winner of the race. If the results are changed, it's that winner. So the winner is actually Hamilton. The first DNF is actually an easy one because it was Zhou Guanyu and it remains as such. And the number of finishers, we actually always go by the number of cars that finished the race, which was 19, as in retirements are the things that essentially stop, or non-starts are the things. Disqualifications still count as a finisher by the rules. It's all on the website. You can go read the full list of the rules if you want, but that's why, if anybody is wondering why they maybe didn't get points for 18 finishers or didn't get points for Leclerc pole and so on, this is why. Same as Sainz. Hits his finishing position after the penalties, which was 6th. So that is that. In terms of the overall standings, Steen Nielsen's still leading the championship with 27 points. But our second place member is Eric Mills this week with 26. So that second and third place is heating up. It feels much like the real championship where Verstappen's at the top and just about managing to get by. And because the people picking up points when he doesn't pick up points are different people every week, nobody actually catches him up. And I feel like Steen's in that sort of slight situation at the moment where Steen has been leading for a few weeks now, but the second place person keeps chopping and changing behind. So, it's feeling much like the real championship there. In terms of F1 Fantasy, the official F1 Fantasy game anyway, Dreamland F1 was our winner this week with 321 points, but Ricky Bobby Racing is our leader there with 3,208 points. And then over on Grid Rival Fantasy, Laura 803644498, obviously that was a generated username, I assume, 978 points for Laura this week, making her our overall winner. But the leader in the championship there is still Mighty Hawk 44 with 13,657 points. That's why you should punctuate numbers, because I could have read that easier had I done that. Right. If you want to get involved with any of that, please head to backtothegrid.com. There's sign up for Predictions League. You can see those rules I've just been talking about. You can check the tables. You can do all that. You can be ready for after the summer break if you want to get involved. It is worth doing, because if anyone ever scores 5 out of 5 in a race weekend, you you win a prize, and you can also get involved with the fantasy leagues through there, because there's a little fantasy section that will give you the links to both the official F1 fantasy and the grid rival fantasy leagues if you want to see those and get involved with those. Before we do inbox, this is where I normally go into inbox, but we've got a little bit of news, just a tiny bit of news to discuss before we go into the inbox.
Yeah, it's actually been confirmed today. In fact, within the last couple of hours before we record the podcast for a change, that Sainz is going to Williams next year on a multi-year deal. It was pretty well believed that he had offers on the table from Audi and Alpine and possibly more. But James Vels has convinced him Williams is the place to be. I think definitely a good thing for Williams. Great move for Williams. I think Sainz and Albon is a pretty formidable driver lineup. For Carlos Sainz, what do you think about this as a move for Sainz?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I still liked the idea of the Audi seat. I know the Sauber's not particularly up to much at the moment, but Audi are the kind of manufacturer that come into motorsports with the aim of winning. They don't come in to just compete, to just turn up. And I know you could say the same about the way Lawrence Stroll was, Aston Martin came in to compete, I came in to compete, but Audi have got an actual track record in doing it. Like, they enter WEC, they win at WEC. They enter Rally Series. They make one of the most iconic Group B rally cars of all time. They enter DTM and they win in DTM. Like they compete. Formula E. They enter Formula E. They win in Formula E. It's ingrained in them, much like Mercedes, much like Ferrari of the past. Like they don't just come to turn up. They come to compete. And that's not to say Williams, for example, don't. Williams obviously want to win. Williams have been successful. But the big factor for Williams will always be, in this day and age, they are a customer team in a sport where you need to be a manufacturer in reality to have. And I know people will throw the whole, well, Red Bull aren't a manufacturer, but they are essentially a factory team for the most part, other than the Renault era, because they were the Honda factory team essentially, and now they're expanding that to building the powertrains that they're currently using. So you might as well be a factory team when you're in their scenario, kind of like the McLaren Mercedes era, where Mercedes weren't running their own team. McLaren were kind of a Mercedes factory entry by proxy. You only have to go to Stuttgart and go around the Mercedes Museum and see like literal Mika Hakkinen Formula One cars everywhere, and as far as Mercedes are concerned, that is a Mercedes entry, and because it was a partnership. And I think Williams unfortunately don't have that scenario, and I can't see them having that scenario, at least in the near future. But I don't know, maybe there's an element of just trying to avoid that. Maybe
that's the thing.
He's been at Renault, he's been at Ferrari, and had issues with it essentially. Maybe there's something about Williams that appeals to him in the sense of it feels safe, for want of a better term.
You look at those three options: Williams, Audi, Alpine, that we think he had on the table. Audi, they've just got rid of Andreas Seidel and I forget his name, the other guy that was running the show. They're having a big change at the top. Obviously, Sauber have not advanced in the way we expected them to, with Audi coming on board sooner. Alpine have just announced that Bruno Famin is going to be moving on from team principal pretty much a year to the day after he took that job. Like, there's so much movement and change at them, and Williams at the very least seem to be stable, have someone solidly in charge, and they're going in a direction. Whether Sainz is going to be around there enough to see the fruits of that, who knows? Like, maybe he's got some clauses in that contract that if certain teams offer him a deal, he can leave.
Maybe.
But yeah, it's going to be an interesting dynamic there. Like, I really hope Williams keep moving forward so we can see Sainz and Albon in a decent car in the fight with other teams. I
think there's at least the one thing that they will 100% have going for them is what is a strong driver pairing.
Absolutely.
I think like two drivers who just quietly go about their business but can get stuff done, I think is what I would consider Sainz and Albon to both be. And I think that stability, and I would like to think probably lack of conflict between the two of them. I feel like from their personalities, I think I could see them working quite well together and be quite cohesive in terms of like a working relationship and so on. So if anything, that might be what a part of what Sainz has looked at is I might not necessarily be an outright number one, but I'm also definitely not an outright number two.
Yeah.
And maybe that's an element of it. Having said that, if he'd gone somewhere like the Audi thing, he'd have probably found a similar situation or even been considered number one next to Hulkenberg. So I don't think that's the only factor, but I think that is possibly an element of it. And to be fair, if between the two of them, they can help Williams develop something competitive, then he'll be laughing off the other side of his face while we're all sat here at the minute going, oh, this seems like a bit of a weird decision. I'd have done this, I'd have done that. You know, he'll be giving it the middle finger to us, but saying, well, look at this decision, look how it's panned out, if it does work. So, yeah.
Should we dive into the inbox? Because the first question's on this sort of subject.
Yeah, let's pull that one out of the inbox.
Hit the jingle.
You want me to hit the jingle? You want to do the jingle?
We're officially entering the inbox.
Fine, let's do it. If I could find the jingle. There it is.
Put it on the spot.
Keep me saying now. Stay out. Box. Hey, man.
So Tom Murray wrote in to say, with Williams being nice enough to announce Sainz before you record the podcast for a change, do we think the rest of the market will slot in really quickly now, and who do you think will go where? I do think it's going to start moving now. I think by the end of the summer break, we'll probably have everything, or most things. Ironically, I think the one seat we probably won't get confirmed is the one that everyone is expecting to be the most sure, which is Antonelli going to Mercedes, because we've known that's been their first choice for a while now, and Antonelli's only getting better in Formula 2. So I think that's probably a sure thing. RB only have Tsunoda currently signed. The second seat there is still unconfirmed, which I think is as much let's see if we need Daniel Ricciardo in Red Bull as it is it's a weird one with them, because on one hand is Ricciardo about to get a call up to the big team, but if he doesn't, is there any point in him staying at RB when they've got Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar and co waiting for a seat? Weird one there. I still suspect Ricciardo is going to move up and Lawson will take that seat for next year, but who knows with Red Bull. Second Alpine seat's up for grabs alongside Gasly. We know obviously Doohan, their reserve driver, he's very much in the mix. I believe Mick Schumacher did a test recently as well, because obviously Mick drives Alpine in WEC, so I think he did a test there as well. And they've got another young driver in F2, I believe, at the moment.
You put me on the spot there. I can't think of anyone other than Doohan in the program at the minute off the top of my head.
Expansive academy program. I'm trying to remember who the Jack Doohan, Victor Martins. That's
of course. Yeah.
So he's on the way, and then we've got Gabriele Mini in F3 as well, who is doing extremely well. So lots to choose from for them. But I think right now Jack Doohan is probably my favourite for that seat.
Yeah, probably. now that the whole Sainz speculation settled, I think it makes sense for them to go from their academy, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. And then finally, the second Sauber/Audi seat is up for grabs alongside Hulkenberg, which I now think is going to end up going to Bottas. I think they're going to stick with him at least for another year. Like, if you're in a position trying to build a team and develop into something, I can't think of short of signing Alonso, there's not much more experience you could get than Hulkenberg and Bottas at the moment.
Yeah, unless Ricciardo starts working his way in there because he's sensing that he might not get the Red Bull situation he wants, or someone like that.
Can't see that happening.
Do you know what? If I were Audi, I'd try and snag someone like Lawson from under Red Bull's nose while they're messing around, not making their decisions. And there's something else around this we'll touch on in a second, I think. But I'd try and just be cheeky about it. They've not got their own academy program set up yet or anything like that. So why not go and try and nick a driver from somebody else's?
I mean, it's pretty widely understood that if Lawson doesn't get a seat next year, he's free to go to other teams. So they've got to put him somewhere if they want to keep him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure there'll be lots of drive market content over the summer break to keep us busy.
Yeah, I think they'll start falling into place now over the summer though, because of Sainz was the last key bit of it, I think. So hopefully the others will start to fall into place, and we'll maybe be coming back after the break with some idea of what the grid next year looks like.
Yeah, I reckon.
Paul D says, "Hey man, did McLaren make an error in not putting Lando..." Sorry, that should be pitting. It's spell corrected on Paul there. In not pitting Lando before Max when they were getting to the second round of stops. Surely he would have undercut him and the new hards would have lasted quite easily. I think overall McLaren messed the stops up. Even from the the phase on the mediums, trying to go as long as they did and then bailing on that idea, it would seem. But that's just me.
Yeah. They split the race into almost perfect thirds. It was 15 laps on mediums, 14 on hards, 15 on hards. It was, they seem to be relying on this "we'll have fresher tyres at the end" thing. But watching that race, it was pretty apparent that you needed quite a big advantage to make an overtake, and I think they leaned a bit too hard on that.
Yeah.
Because they absolutely could have undercut him, I think.
Definitely.
And the final question this week from Sarah Barnard: do you think Red Bull will replace Perez over the summer break, or do you think they'll hold out and see what happens at the end of the year? Thanks.
So while we've been sat here, Twitter is starting to go a bit mental over the alleged news. And I say alleged because at this point Red Bull have still not said anything official, just random internet personalities and such have basically said that Horner has apparently addressed the team in general and said to stop any speculation, Perez is staying until the end of the season. So there's all sorts of places starting to report that as we're sat here talking.
More and more reputable sources are reporting it now as well. So I think
it's gaining the weight from the right places, which means it probably is legit. But I don't see anything in any of it that says beyond the season.
No, it's all very much till the end of the season.
So going back to the question, no, they probably won't replace him over the summer break by the looks of what's happening while we're sat here talking. However, I do still think that there will be talks. I mean, there was a whole... Again, I don't know how legitimate and where this came from, but there was a whole thing going around over the weekend that I saw that was something to do with apparently Lawson and Ricciardo are signed up to do some kind of test in one of the old Red Bulls or something like that, which was being deemed a shootout for the seat. How legitimate that is, I don't know, but I feel like they're just going for some kind of consistency to the end of the season because essentially they're already falling behind away from this sort of dominance that they had at the start of the season, where Max could win without really having to deal with any pressure, to the point where now they're having to actively fight for wins. I think there's maybe an argument from a team management perspective that throwing in a driver change to add to that will just destabilise them even further, whereas what they need at the minute is at least they know consistently Perez is not reliable, and they can just like leave Perez to do what he's doing and maybe focus on whatever they need to do to regain the pace and, you know, be more consistently at the front like they were at the start of the season. I don't know. I think that maybe it's easier to stay as it is, basically, and try and regain the pace with Max than it is to bring somebody new in and add just another factor to the whole thing that detracts away from trying to keep Max on point to win a World Drivers' Championship, I think is what I'm getting at in a roundabout way.
Yeah, and like it's weird. Like if you listen to the two drivers' comments at Hungary, it seems like the developments on the Red Bull seem to have taken things away from where Verstappen likes it and a bit more towards where Perez likes things. So they obviously still have enough belief that he can turn things. I mean, he's essentially got 10 races now to save his career, and they're giving him that. So
very unlike Red Bull.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine the likes of Gasly and Albon right now being like, where was this a few years ago?
Kvyat,
yeah.
Ricciardo himself, I think, at one point, maybe. No, Ricciardo never left mid-season. But anyway, it's... I can't say I'm surprised, but I'm also... didn't expect it. It's a very weird scenario to find myself in. Like, I'm just a bit like... oh, okay about it. Like, I'm not shocked, but I'm also didn't expect. It wasn't something I expected. It's weird. Don't know. Just feels like the easy choice to say, let's just keep him till the end of the season and focus on what we can get with Max. Like I said before, I think that's what it is. So, last one, or is that the last one? Was that the last one?
That's it. It's the lot.
That is it. Right. That wraps us up then. Thank you to everyone who has joined us live in Discord. If you want to find out about being part of that community, then please head to patreon.com/back of the grid, where you can find out all the details on how to sign up there, which then gets you into the Discord. And you can be part of that lovely community there. If you are part of our YouTube following, then please remember to subscribe and like and all that stuff. I'm sure you'll know from previous months and weeks that while we're on YouTube, we'll do what we can to get back to like comments and debates and so on there. So be sure to leave a comment if you want to interact with us that way. And if you want to do it in the more general sense, then feel free to try and find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those places. X, if you want to call it that now. I've got to get out of the habit of calling it Twitter, but yeah, there you go. So just search for Back of the Grid on any of those social platforms and you will find us. But that is it. We will be around over the summer break. We don't go anywhere. We put episodes out. So how many weeks have we actually got until a race? Is it a 3-week break?
I think it's a 3-week gap, yeah.
So we'll probably be here for the majority of that. We will keep everyone abreast of the schedule over the break, because we usually have to talk absolute nonsense, even more than usual, when there's literally no news because every team is shut down. So I'm sure we'll be back next week to talk about the actual outcome of this whole Perez situation. I'm sure we'll maybe go into detail about some other stuff. And we usually do a mid-season review. So we'll probably just kind of do a bit of a recap of where everyone's at this point. So essentially, stay subscribed and keep an eye on those notifications in order to see what we're posting when over the coming weeks before the racing is back. But that is it for this week. So thank you again to everyone who's joined us, and we will see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.